How's everybody doing? One person is doing fantastic. How's everybody doing? That's what I want to hear. We're going to be talking about a subject that I really enjoy. I think that in the past 17, 20 years since the internet has come around, we've seen a lot of disruption happen in easy markets. Things like e-commerce, online media, very things that don't really have a barrier to entry apart from the fact that you have to do it well. And now that we've sort of saturated the easy to innovate spaces, we're seeing more and more people innovate in places that are hard. And I really like to see that. We've seen that with Uber innovating in a highly regulated taxi market. And we're starting to see that a lot more in the biomedical industry, in the medical device industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. And there's a lot of opportunities to take everything we've learned about doing iterative innovation in software and applying that, not only technologically applying software to these industries, but using the methodologies that we've learned about how to be quick and what it means to have a 2-minute turnaround time as opposed to 1 hour turnaround time and things like that. So I'm really excited to have out from San Francisco, California, today with us, David Wallace. So David, why don't you talk a little bit about Proteus and about yourself and where you're coming from?
Sure. So hello from California. My name is Dave Wallace, and I'm part of a startup out there called Proteus Digital Health. The startup was founded in 2004. We've grown probably just past the startup phase, and the organization is now transitioning into more of a traditional company that will sell a commercial product. We have about 300 employees, and yeah, tell you a little bit about digital medicine today. So transitioning out of a startup means you guys have now raised a lot of money. You guys are now pretty established, and especially in the medical device industry, growing out of a startup means moving from R&D to actually releasing a product. So can you talk a little bit about the product you guys are putting out, what it does, how you got to this idea, the problem it's solving, and things like that? Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess probably the first question that should be answered is, what is digital medicine? So I'll give you a basic idea of what a simplified system of digital medicine would look like. So imagine medicine like you normally get prescribed from your physician, but over-encapsulated or co-encapsulated with that is a tiny sensor the size of a grain of rice. So you take your medicine just as normal, and then the patient has a sensor on their torso that essentially reads when you took your medicine. And as we talk about this, that recording of taking medicine in the healthcare industry is known as adherence. And it's a very, very large problem. Depending on your source, anywhere from 30 to 50% of patients that are prescribed medicine don't take it properly. And that presents huge challenges to the healthcare industry. So that's digital medicine. I'm going to give a couple examples of why digital medicine might be important with some of the problems that it can help solve. So one example is a familial example. Imagine you have a grandmother, or your parents are getting old, and they're prescribed medicine that's very critical to their health and longevity by the physician. As their son or as a concerned family member, you want to know, oh, did grandma or did mom take her medicine today? Maybe it's an elderly person and they forget. It would be great if there was somewhere they can check to go, oh yeah, I did take my medicine today. So that's that's a simple use case that I think provides a lot of value to a family person. So that's one example. Another example is from the point of view of a physician. Say you were doing a clinical study and you talk to the patients and you know from the data that not everyone takes the medicine even when they tell you they take the medicine. Well, now with digital medicine, you have more complete, more accurate data. So you can base your study findings, you can base your medical decisions against your patient, against real-time data, and you can be more confident in your decision. One of the other advantages to this, as a physician, you don't have to wait 6 months to see how the patient's responding before you decide to change the medicine they're on or up the dosage level. Now with digital medicine, in about 1/6 of the time, a physician can practice medicine and make those decisions with much, much more accurate data quickly. So that's a vast improvement to the physician. And then from the point of view of a healthcare system, the benefit is also very large. If physicians are able to treat patients in a more timely, more effective manner, then all of a sudden you unburden your healthcare system. Patients don't have to make return visits as often. They're essentially taking time out of the hospital less, and overall that's going to result in a net win for your healthcare system. And that sort of win makes healthcare more accessible to everyone.
And so you guys, so I mean, essentially, as I said briefly in the beginning, you're applying something that we already see in a lot of other markets, just in a very different way. I mean, the idea of tracking what we do, I track my steps with my health kit on my phone and things like that. But you're going a little beyond it, and you're even more specifically going into a very regulated market. It is not easy to get someone to start swallowing technology. So how do you guys go about this process? How long did that take? What was the process like just to make it okay to have someone swallow a sensor? Because that seems like something that is not as easy as getting someone to wear a bracelet.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've done approximately 88 clinical studies with the ingestible sensor. We also worked very closely with the different regulatory organizations to help them understand our technology. Those were some of the main hurdles.
And so as you guys go forward, so you're in a position where now the idea is to get anyone, are you selling directly to the healthcare systems? Are you selling to the pill manufacturers and they're turning around and selling that back? How do you go forward? You guys are currently approved in the US, right? You're what, FDA approved, I guess it is?
We're FDA approved in the US for use with a placebo right now.
Okay.
We anticipate being approved with a generic medicine in the cardiometabolic area in 2017.
So that's going to be like blood pressure, like beta blockers and things like that? Things like that.
Prilosec.
Something
like
in something in that space, just to get.
And then we're also approved in the European Union.
Okay. And so this is part of the steps to innovating. I mean, what you guys are bringing is, I think, an amazing solution to a problem, and I think a lot of people have tried to go about it differently without having to go through the pharmaceutical industry. Some sort of exterior, you log what you write, what you take, or whatever, and things like that. But this is a very sure-proof way to go about it. But the steps seem very long to go through it. I mean, this project, this idea started, what, 12, 13 years ago? This idea of ingestible sensors, essentially?
Well, I think this idea was nascent maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's gone through 4 different generations now.
How big was the sensor on the I gotta imagine that I hope the size is.
It's always been very small.
It's always been very small. Okay, so it wasn't
technology.
like I wasn't swallowing an iPhone at one point. That would be. But this is also what's really interesting is we look at smaller and smaller technology. My phone gets more and more hard drive space. The advantage is the sensor cost is essentially going to zero. I mean, it's not exactly zero, and the smaller you want to do it, the more it costs. But there's a huge advantage, which is you guys are providing people with one-use sensors, right? I mean, I don't imagine a way in which you're recuperating these sensors at the end of their use.
Yeah, we're definitely not. But you alluded to something that's very important, and that's the challenges of working in a regulated environment. So, for example, in the medical device and the pharmaceutical industry, development times in the past have been 2, 3, 4 years. I've worked in pharmaceutical places where for their distributed control system, which is the computer system that runs their manufacturing area, no one made changes to it for 20 years just because the cost and time of making the change with all the documentation and the paperwork and the testing was so burdensome. So what goes along with these long development times is very long processes. And the big challenge that you were alluding to is today when you want to work with the best developers, everyone works in an agile or extreme, very, very fast, iterative fashion. And how do you update your processes and your planning within your organization to support those quick turns? And then document all that work in a way that's sufficient so that when you get audited, you can defend the work and show all the good engineering and testing that you've done.
So ultimately, I mean, it's not just a question of innovating on the product side, i.e. pills and things like that. It's the whole value chain of what's going on. And I don't want to say it almost seems arbitrary which sectors we decided at some point would be regulated and which aren't. I mean, obviously you don't want a pharmaceutical industry that doesn't have checks and balances in it, but it seems more burdensome than helpful, the regulatory environment that exists. And maybe that's because we've gotten used to it being there, and if it wasn't there, it'd be a lot awful or more awful, and we'd have more issues. But it seems like there is just, I would not want to build a pharmaceutical company today, like doing tech for the pharmaceutical industry. And I have friends that are doing tech in regulated markets. And we'll take this for example. So you guys are approved for placebos. You hope to be approved for generic medicine. At what point are you getting to the, let's call it like high value medicine, where if someone doesn't take it, bad things happen, right? Because if someone doesn't take a placebo, maybe someone's test is a little off. But when the higher you climb up, and is every step going up there, that's a new clinical trial, that's a new approval system?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think where we're focused on initially is demonstrating how much more valuable digital medicines are compared to conventional medicines. The clinical trial example was a really good one. The data is more dependable because the accuracy of it, the source, rather than coming from a human, it's coming from a tested system. So you can make better decisions. It falls in line with sort of data-driven decision making.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing this across both, even the wellness or across different medical device industries, and also in other locations where we're more likely to trust a computer to do something right than we are to trust a human to do it, and because human error is much higher. I have someone who built a connected, what do you call that, for people with diabetes. It makes sure you take your insulin injections and things like that. And you see that the statistics on the market are that the majority of people don't measure their blood sugar levels, or if they do, they don't write them down, because right now the standard system is to write it down in a notebook. And so when they go to have a meeting, they're just going to fudge a bunch of numbers, or they have bad numbers and they lie about them because they're embarrassed about them, which means that a doctor has to operate under the assumption that someone may be lying. And so you get these really weird situations where the more information we have and the more reliable the source, especially when it's not us, because we're terrible sources of information, the better off we can do in terms of health advantages. So do you guys see yourself, so you guys definitely see yourself in the next 5 years going, continuing to knock out these regulatory barriers and climb up the ladder?
Yeah, absolutely. The goal is to show improved outcomes, right? Value to the patient, value to the physician, value to the healthcare system. If there are numbers, I just don't remember. I think it's about 11 in the United States. A patient on a cardiometabolic panel. So they're taking a series of 1, 2, 3, 4 different drugs together as part of their prescription. I think we can cut the cost of that almost in half once we mature in size. And that doesn't sound like much, half of $1,100 or $1,200, but because the volumes are so large and there's so many patients on these medicines, it really helps the entire system dramatically.
And so do you see, with this infrastructure that you're putting in place, you ultimately see people lining up this, assurance, this ability to see who's taking what medicine. You're hoping to line that up with, hopefully, I imagine, other tech that's looking at the results of that medicine. And hopefully the idea is to tie those together. Are you already working with people who do?
That's already part of the current system.
Everything's in place.
Our current product offering is called Discover. And the different elements are the ingestible sensor or the medicine that the patient takes. There's the sensor that essentially senses or records whenever you take your medicine. There's other data, physiological data that's also recorded, activity, rest, position, and these data are passed to your mobile device. And then from your mobile device, there's an entire ecosystem of various software applications that take that data, turn it into useful metrics depending on who's looking at it. So whether it's the patient, and this is combined with scheduling information. So you get reminders of, oh, when am I supposed to take my medicine? I forgot to take my medicine. Not only on your mobile device, but via electronic mail. Your physician is going to get more aggregate data, so he's going to get a complete picture of how you're doing. And you can choose to share this data with family members as well, as we sort of talked about. So that's a very, very good use case. So there's a whole back-end, front-end mobile app ecosystem available.
And do you guys see other, not necessarily in exactly what you're doing, but other complementary players where you see this sort of same push towards bringing more data, innovating in regulatory environments? One company I think of is Scanadu, which is completely a little different in what they do, but Scanadu is a company that recently raised about $18 million, and they famously did an Indiegogo campaign for something basic like a breathalyzer. And now they just came out with a connected device that measures your body health. It's a pee stick. I don't know how to say that in a euphemistic way, but it's really interesting because the amount of for the longest time, a lot of people had joked, which is that theoretically the smartest device in your home is your toilet, because there's so much data in what comes out of you, and so they went ahead and said, okay, we're going to do it. It sounds like a joke, but they built a connected pee stick, and you pee on it, and they can tell you a lot about your hydration. I mean, like everything that we can do today with basic urine samples. And so do you see in the area where you guys are innovating other players that you want to work with or that you want to see succeed in the same way you guys are growing?
So the core technology that we have is the ingestible sensor. And we have a few strategic partners out there currently at this time that are developing different takes or spins on the technology. One is Oracle. They have a software offering for clinical trials specifically, and they want to incorporate digital medicine into that infrastructure. So that's one big partner. Novartis is another one, very large pharmaceutical company. There's also a Japanese pharmaceutical company, Otsuka, who's planning on, they're investigating different solutions, yeah, that are really exciting and interesting. So there's a lot of chance for the market, for you, to see if this actually adds value.
And what seems to be interesting, I mean, I don't know in too much detail how Oracle plays in the market, but some of these players are traditional actors, traditional pharmaceutical players. Some of them are, I mean, Oracle's just software across the board for anything that's large and heavy. And so it's really interesting. You guys end up marrying these two, this sort of old world industry and this new world database management, software management for big processes. What would you like to see in the next 18 months? What's the ideal outcome 18 months from now for you guys?
From Proteus' point of view, since we're doing clinical studies, you know, essentially data that proves benefit across the board would be very positive.
But it's still a slow process. So like, you know, for me, an 18-month outlook for Uber is like a phenomenal, like I could imagine they could be delivering people to the moon. But for you guys, it's still, you guys have a 5-year plan that is relatively structured based on what you can expect. A, that the results, you know, if the results are positive, and B, how long it'll take to go through all these hoops, or maybe not.
I think as a startup, nobody gets 5 years.
Okay. So
that's not necessarily the case.
So you guys see 2 hurdles in front of you, and it's just get over one and get ready for the next one. Yeah. And the hurdles are still clinical trials. The hurdles are still, we need to get approved for this, we need to get approved for this. How many of those hurdles are there, just in the regulatory sense? Yeah,
so the thing that's different in these regulated industries from pure tech is the focus, and the focus is really safety of our patients, right? And so those hurdles are put in place for a very good reason. And thus far, we've been able to jump them successfully. Yeah. So that's very exciting.
You guys have worked out well. You're ready for a lot of it. Do you see the tech where it is at today were there not these regulatory hurdles, would be ready to be used? Or do you think that as you jump these hurdles, the tech gets better and it's sort of a back and forth? Is it an iterative process to go through these hurdles, or is it just a necessary hurdle?
No, it's definitely iterative. You know, we've worked to get even though we're on our 5th generation, getting the product out there quickly. We want to get feedback as soon as possible. So it's definitely still a work in progress, but it's come a long way.
So these clinical trials sort of end up being like early adopters. I mean, you're still managing to get user feedback. You're still making the product better and better, despite the fact that you're not at a stage now where you can just say, let's roll out and let's work with pharmaceutical companies.
Well, we probably could, but how good is good enough, right? So we're always working.
Definitely. Well, so we don't have too much time. We wanted to help the amazing Web2day team get a little back on schedule after this morning's power outage. So if there are people who are, how many people here are working in a regulated environment? Can I get a show of hands? How many people work in something where they have a bit of regulation in terms of what they can't do? Insurance industry, baking industry, medical technology industry. Show of hands really quickly. Hands up in the air. Okay. So one or 2 people. Everyone else is just here for the ride along with us. So if you have any questions, we have about 5 minutes left. Feel free to walk down to the front here or raise your hand, and we will bring you a microphone from the young gentleman there. While I'm letting you guys think a little bit about that, what are the things that you guys have learned in the last few years going through this process? Were there things you didn't see coming, both in terms of innovating in the product itself and in terms of innovating inside a regulatory environment? What are sort of the lessons learned that you would love to pass on to someone who might be considering doing this?
Yeah, I guess, great question, by the way. Probably the biggest challenge is developing processes within the enterprise that scale with your development cadence. And, you know, so one of the learnings that really came out of it is the faster your software development team iterates, the stronger you want your test team to be. So for example, if you iterate quickly, you really want testers who know how to develop and code, and you want developers who think about test. You don't just want them working together, you want them to come in with that skill set. So that was a big piece. Putting in support processes. I'll give you an example that connect different groups. So code and test is one, but then once you've tested and it looks good to go, there's a transfer to manufacturing piece. So once it's manufactured, then it's boxed up and it can go out the door. So some of the challenges you face in a quickly iterating world is, let's say because we supply the mobile device in our kits. Say we built it with iOS 4.3. And that's what we tested on, that's what we've shown is safe. And then all of a sudden, somebody drops out an update. How do you handle that part of the supply chain? How do you handle the testing related to that update? How do you get that transfer to manufacturing without messing up your schedules? Because in the manufacturing environment, if you lose a day, you've lost millions of dollars, especially once you scale up. So thinking and planning for those events, which must happen, right, is really part of the challenge. And so putting processes in place to handle those things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's not just a question of focusing on the core product, which obviously at the end of the day is the most important thing, but you need to create an ecosystem and an environment where all the various barriers that could come up, both as a company just in general, shipping is, any hardware company is gonna, any physical product is gonna have to deal with this at some point. And especially now that we're in this combination hardware, software environment, you have both a question of how can one affect the other and how can the other affect one. And making sure that you create a system where you know once one of these things come up, it's sort of like, it's almost like disaster planning. Like we know this is gonna happen, it's probably gonna be a bad day for us. How do we plan for it so that we do it as smoothly as possible and so that we look like we know what we're doing? Is that about right?
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable.
Is that pretty reasonable? Okay. It looks like we're out of time, so I wanted to thank all of you for sitting with us. I know that we are among a minority of the conferences happening in English, and I appreciate you guys joining us. David and I are going to be hanging out afterwards. We'll be down out in the main area. Si vous voulez passer, demander des questions en français. Le grand blague, c'est que nous tous les deux on parle français, donc on aurait pu facilement faire cette truc en français aussi. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out with us. So I will hand the microphone back over to Simone and the rest of the Web2day team, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, David.
Thank you.